Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for this event. I've really been enjoying this, so thank you, Arlindo, for putting this together. I'm going to talk about telling underwater stories, which is basically what we've been doing all weekend. But my platform is with photography and writing. So I'm an underwater photographer, a freelance writer, also a boat captain, and a scuba instructor. And I've basically planned my life around diving and trying to dive more, taking jobs in proximity of good diving, and working in the dive industry as well. So I've been very lucky to travel around the world and document much of what I've seen through photography and writing. And when Arlindo asked me to talk about telling stories and suggested the topic, I kind of was like, how do I wrap my head around talking about telling the stories as opposed to just telling stories? So when I was working on this presentation, it became very apparent that, first of all, there's so many stories to tell. There's so many ways to tell them. And my stories sort of started falling into two categories. So the category of the stories that I went in search of, be it an animal or a dive destination, a type of diving, or an event. And then the stories that just sort of happened that I feel like the ocean wanted to tell me. And so while there are times that you get super lucky and you just take that one shot that ends up winning a contest, or stumbling upon a topic that you've never heard of before that makes the cover story of a magazine, generally that does not happen. You don't just waltz into a cave and snap one shot and get this. In reality, to tell underwater stories that get seen by many people, be it through magazines or online and books and videos, there's usually a ton of planning that goes into it. You start with an idea, you research extensively. For example, again, if you're looking for an animal, you need to know where it lives, how you get there, what season it's there. And then learning about behaviors can sort of, first of all, help you find the critter, but then also capture it doing something interesting. So the more you know, the better you can tell the story, and then the better you can also get the images to help tell the story. So cardinal fish are generally kind of a boring fish. You guys have probably swam by many of them without even taking a second look. But if you know a little bit extra about their reproductive habits, the males actually hold the eggs in their mouth, and they'll spit them out every couple of minutes and kind of aerate them. So when you know more, you can sort of take that extra step to learn about something and capture something a bit more exciting. Or for instance, this itty-bitty Sean the sheep nudibranch, these guys are no bigger than a piece of dust, really, really tiny. And if you just went to the reef and tried to find these, it's going to be very difficult. You'll be far more productive knowing where they live, which happens to be an algae leaf or an algae that kind of looks like a leaf. It's sort of a broad leaf. It lives in the sand or in the muck. And of course, having a good dive guide can also help you find good critters like this. A little secret, a lot of the amazing photos you see not only have a good photographer behind them, but they have a good dive guide behind them pointing out to the photographer where the stuff is. So perhaps your story idea is a broad one. If you just want to talk about muck diving in Indonesia, a photo like this it's all right. You can talk about where the nudibranch lives. We've got some eggs on the algae. But if you look a little bit more into it, you might stumble across the information that this is actually a solar-powered nudibranch. So he also eats the algae leaf that he lives on, and he is able to steal the chloroplast cells from the algae and store them in his pretty little fluffy sheep extensions, which are actually called serrata. And then he is able to use the sun to power those chloroplasts that then help energize him. So I love the way imagery and text can kind of enhance an entire story. So if I just show you the image and don't tell you anything, like, oh, it's a cute nudibranch, and if I just tell you the story without the image, kind of cool. But to be able to combine them both is what I really enjoy doing. So some of my favorite stories to tell are the ones about underwater wrecks, and I'm so excited to hear from the wreck divers later. I find it incredible to be able to swim through these underwater museums that aren't really supposed to be there, be it a ship or an airplane. I just love to be able to see them, and especially if they've gone down during battle or during bad weather. There's sort of these moments frozen in time that we get to swim through. So I also like to sort of take images that kind of inspire conversation and again sort of force you to read the caption or the text with it, because what's going on here? When I look at this photo, it's a very dirty galley, like clearly probably a bachelor pad. No one has cleaned this kitchen for about 75 years. And it is a galley inside the USS Saratoga, which was one of the first aircraft carriers, and it was sort of a darling of the US World War II naval history. And while she was unsinkable during the war, they then took her to Bikini Atoll during Operation Crossroads, which was the nuclear testing, and sank her there. She went down during the Baker test. So I love to be able to sort of use both to tell a story. And I love the way images and being underwater and taking photos sort of send me down this rabbit hole in a research frenzy. I love be it looking up animal behaviors or researching more on wrecks. This is from the USS Coolidge in Vanuatu. And prior to getting there, I hadn't really done my homework. I just wanted to dive the wreck. And after diving it, I was picking the brains of the dive guides. I was reading the books in the dive shop, also Googling and things like that, and found out some really interesting information about this wreck. So Espiritu Santo was actually the second largest Allied base in the Pacific Theater. And throughout World War II, over 500,000 servicemen and women passed through, but there was never any active battle there. So it was a place for hospitals, repair shops, supply, also R&R for soldiers. And the question is, why is there a US ship that sank on this US base that didn't see any active military fighting? And what happened is the captain didn't get all the information on how to safely enter the harbor, and it hit one of their mines. So basically he hit friendly mines. And he was a very good captain, and he ran it aground, which also makes it great for divers because it's a shore dive. And he managed to save everyone on board except only 2 lives were lost. And again, as I was on this research frenzy of trying to find out all this information, I also learned an interesting piece that in the Pacific Theater of World War II, more soldiers died of malaria than actually battle. And the Coolidge was carrying what at that point in time was probably the last of the quinine supply basically not being used on Earth. So they were delivering the quinine to this big base that would then get it transported out to other places in the Pacific Theater and help save the lives of these soldiers who were dying not even in battle. And it all went down on the ship. So it was documented that there was a doctor on the island telling salvage divers that whatever you do, I just need you to go and get the quinine and bring it back up. But none of it was actually recovered. So you find these medical bottles within the Coolidge, and I don't actually know if any of these are quinine or what quinine looks like, but the bottles still have some of the tops on them. There's liquids, there's powders, and it's just very fascinating to me to see this sort of thing and then find out the history about it. And then in more recent history, we have the sinking of ships for artificial reefs. This is the Spiegel Grove off Key Largo in Florida. And we basically clean up these ships, we make them environmentally okay to be sunk, and then they sink them in hopes of becoming a new home for coral growth and also fish aggregation, and they can become a bit of a tech diver wonderland, as well as really good for recreational divers also. And then there are the awesome things that happen underwater that we always hope for, but we never expect. And I think it's those experiences and stories that keep us going back and diving over and over again. I also truly believe that some of these characters in the ocean, they have stories to tell, and sometimes it really even feels like they want their photos taken. So this was in the Galapagos, and it was actually at the end of a dive, and I was generally always the person who was the last person getting on the boat. So I was still in the water, we drifted away from the reef, I'd passed my camera up, and I was passing one fin up when I heard a puff of air behind me, and I spun around, and this guy was spinning around me and looking right at me, so I took my fin back and pleaded to have my camera returned to me, and I managed to get some lovely photos of this amazing character underwater. And as he was sort of swimming away, and it felt like the encounter was sort of ending, I flipped over to video just in my mind to shoot some B-roll of this guy swimming away. And my advice here is to always be ready. Never turn your camera off. I have a bad habit at safety stops of sort of turning my camera off, tucking the strobes in, and getting ready to pass up the camera. But sometimes that's when the really amazing stuff happens. So he kind of led me to a pod of bottlenose dolphins out in the middle of nowhere in the Galapagos, which was fairly incredible. Also G-rated dolphins, for those of you at dinner last night, and lovely, friendly dolphins, not jerks, lovely dolphins. So when I'm also diving, I like to have my camera sort of in a neutral, ready position. So if I've been shooting something where I've moved my strobes around, I've switched all my settings up to get whatever I'm shooting, as I'm swimming away, headed towards the next thing, I have sort of a camera-ready position where I move my strobes back to, just kind of a basic, gonna reduce the backscatter, gonna work, and put the settings back to sort of the f8, 1/125, whatever you can get an image at, so that if you do get some of these incredible flyby situations where you only get one shot, you're ready to get it. And then if the critters are friendly and hang out for a while, you can change up your settings and get some more creative images. So, of course, there are those times that we do all of the planning. We have researched where we want to go, what time of year that coral spawning is going to happen on the second Thursday after the full moon, when it's a harvest moon and it's, 2 days after whatever, and you show up and it happened the night before you got there. It is, of course, really easy to be disappointed in these situations and get kind of frustrated, like, I'm not even going to dive, like my whole trip is ruined, I'm not going to see the coral spawning, and, I'm just going to go to the bar and hang out. Don't do that. Because I've come up with some of my best diving articles and images and trips that didn't go quite as planned. Chances are there are still going to be things to photograph and stories that we haven't even considered. And sometimes those have become my favorite. So my lesson here is to always sort of be open-minded. It might not be what you were after, but there's still something to shoot. And worst case scenario, break out your trusty macro lens and get close and take photos of random fish, whatever's in the water. Fish are amazing. I mean, their scales and their colors and textures and everything. It might not be the coral spawning or the whale shark that was supposed to be there during that month, but you can still get something. I mean, even sand. Have you ever taken a diopter to sand? Sand has all of these interesting colors and textures, and it's different everywhere you go. So always be open-minded and keep shooting and keep looking for your stories, even if it wasn't the one you were after. And I also love that you learn new things as you go different places, or even return to the same places that you've been to over and over again. I am fascinated with this parasitic relationship. I was blown away the first time I saw it, and the first time I didn't actually see it because I didn't understand what the dive guide was telling me. She had the regulator out of her mouth, she's pointing at her mouth, and then her eyes, and the anemone fish, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're trying to show me. And back on the boat when she told me, I was like, we need to go back underwater right now. I need to take photos of this. And I think this is just fascinating. So this is a tongue-eating isopod. And the next time your non-diver friends tell you that they're scared of sharks, sharks are not the problem. If these things ever get big and come after us, this is horror movie type scary stuff. When the isopods are very small and sometimes in their larval stage, they come in through the gills and they'll perch up on the tongue, and either some of them sort of freeload and pick food off what the anemone's eating, or they start eating sort of the inside of the fish's mouth. And as they get bigger, they actually dissolve the tongue and become the tongue of the fish. So we can't make up how creepy the ocean can sometimes be, luckily on a very small scale. One thing that I'm actually not always very good at is sharing the stories that we all know about how much trouble the ocean is in. There are so many issues going on. I tend to go for this is pretty and beautiful and I love it, and I want to inspire that love and emotion with the good stuff. But another way to make people care and want to conserve the environment is to show this sort of destruction and the sad side of it. And whenever I teach underwater photography, I actually emphasize that greatly, that we all have this responsibility, even if you're not taking photos, to share what we see. Less than 1% of the world gets to scuba dive. So we are among the few and the lucky to see both the good and the bad. So I really feel like we all need to share what we see, be it good or bad. So this was also in Vanuatu with the Coolidge, and I wasn't even going to reef dive when I was there. Normally you just go wreck diving, and it was the last day, and it's sort of a, I should just go check out the reef anyway sort of idea. We went out to see the reef. And these are crown of thorns starfish, which in a balanced environment and ecosystem, crown of thorns starfish are not necessarily bad. When there's just a few of them and it's a healthy system, they eat coral, but they can actually be helpful in preventing a type of coral species from overpopulating, or if you've got a diseased coral, they may eat them, so they can be good. But unfortunately, we keep seeing where they have sort of these outbreaks where there's just too many of them, and when they eat the coral, they just leave white, dead coral behind them, which is really sad and devastating. And while I was in Vanuatu, this was happening all over the place. It was a tremendously sad dive, and the dive guide that I was with had seen this weeks prior and had been in touch with some university friends, and he had gotten sort of the best advice was to take and do an injection of, I believe it was like vinegar and bleach to kill them. I lived in Hawaii for a long time, and a long time ago also, and the answer, people usually would take out their day's stress on the crown of thorns with a dive knife trying to kill them, which is not a good idea because starfish regenerate, so if you don't completely kill them, you have possibly just created many more crown of thorns starfish. But he is sort of a way where someone who's in this remote location where there's not a lot of diving going on and not a lot of people seeing this, he took what he saw and reached out to universities, and I ended up sharing some of the photos so he could send them as well, to sort of make these relationships and reach out as to what they can do on the ground to try to call them, and also spread the word of what is happening. And then something that I am very guilty of is anthropomorphizing fish. So basically giving human emotions to the fish and kind of making up my own stories about the fish. And I think that that can be a good way to sort of reach out, especially to non-divers, sort of make them see things and like them. So my science background knows that he is just swimming, but doesn't he look like he's saying hi? Like he's really happy to be here at Diving Talks and say hi to all of you. And it's fun to sort of add the charisma factor to sort of share ocean stories with people. And this guy, like, is he blowing kisses? Is he, I think I maybe just caught him red-handed. Something has gone on. And then I've got a yellow-headed jawfish who is very, very grumpy. It's maybe Monday morning. He hasn't had his coffee yet, and he's very, very annoyed with me flashing bright lights in his face over and over again. So guys, 20 minutes, I actually think I'm under, isn't enough time to tell all the stories in the ocean. So please guys, I know you all have stories to tell. Please share them. And thank you all again for coming. I do want to do a quick thank you to Ike Light, who have supported me over the years in keeping my cameras dry. And thank you guys for having me.